are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
May I present Lama Su, Prime Minister of Kamina. And this is Master Jedi
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I trust you're going to enjoy your stay. Please. And now to business. You will be delighted to hear that we are on schedule. 200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
That's good news.
Please tell your master, Sifo Dyas, that his order will be met on time.
I'm sorry, Master...
Jedi Master Sifo Dyas is still a leading member of the Jedi Council, is he not?
Master Sifo Dyas was killed almost 10 years ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But I'm sure he would have been proud of the army we've built for him.
The army?
Yes, a clone army, and I must say, one of the finest we've ever created.
Tell me, Prime Minister, when my master first contacted you about the army, did he say who it was for?
Of course he did. This army is for the Republic. But you must be anxious to inspect the units for yourself.
That's why I'm here.
Hailing from the industrial world and manufacturing base of Minashi, Sifo Dyas was a human male born to a fisherman in relative obscurity. From a very young age, he displayed an innate gift of precognition, making him a high-value recruit for training with the Jedi Order. A Jedi Master by the name of Chirf Maota found Sifo and admitted him into the Order on Coruscant, where he would learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi Knight. Initiates were placed into cohorts called clans. The Hawkbat clan, which Dyas was a part of, also happened to be the same as a character who now resides in infamy within Star Wars history, Count Dooku. Dooku and Sifo were nearly the same age and grew up together. They were friends and confidants for many years, developing a very strong bond. They trained, graduated, and even had near-death experiences together. One day, Dooku and Dyas schemed to break into the Jedi archives on Coruscant to search for a number of forbidden artifacts called the Bogon Collection. Surprisingly, they were able to break through the archive's defenses and locate the artifacts, many of which emanated with dark side energy. This perhaps was Dooku's first exposure and temptation to the dark side, as he was drawn to a metal object which was part of the collection. This was all interrupted by a Tirataka beast who was guarding the archives and had discovered the disturbance. When they had been found, Dooku unleashed a force wave in defense, destroying many of the artifacts. They were later summarily punished for their disobedience by Yoda. Apprentice.
Dyas would eventually graduate from the initiate phase of his training, and his first order of business would be to enter the Padawan tournament. The tournament was meant for new Padawans to compete against their peers in order to display their talents for prospective masters who would take them on as apprentices. During the competition, Sifo would ultimately face off against his closest friend. Dooku was far superior in his martial arts ability and was easily able to overcome Dyas. However, Dooku took pity on him and allowed Sifo to battle him to a stalemate. Dooku's act of generosity did not pay off, unfortunately, as a Jedi whom he wished to train under, Master Kostana, chose Dyas instead of Dooku. Kostana took Sifo under her wing and would teach him the deeper truths of the Force, enhanced his techniques, and would introduce him to the cosmic force. This opened the floodgates of his abilities, making his precognition second to none. He would experience very real and vivid visions, many of which were disturbing. One such vision was of a solar storm on the Republic planet of Protobranch, an agricultural world with floating cities. Dyas' vision saw the storm take out many of the levitating cities and hurl them to the planet's surface, killing millions. This event came to pass in 85 BBY. Kostana realized the depth of his talent, but obscured his ability from the Jedi Order for fear they would see it as too dangerous. As the years went on, Sifo and Kostana took on the project of locating Sith artifacts, particularly that of the Bogan collection. During one such mission, Dooku joined the pair in their search. During this particular excursion, they arrived on the planet of Asusto, and this is where things went haywire. The three comrades were captured and tortured by a cult called the Presagers of Hokatai, who were obsessed with prophecies and visions, believing that sacrificing their victims would give them premonitions of the future. During the torment, Dooku was enraged and allowed the dark side to overtake him. He lashed out with his Force lightning, killing their captors and freeing both Sifo and Kostana. In light of these events, the Jedi Master urged the young pupils not to tell anyone from the Order about what transpired on this mission, while she and Sifo helped Dooku find balance in the Force once again.
The Night. A few years had passed since the incident on Asusto, and Sifo Dyas had achieved the rank of Jedi Knight. Though he was now permitted to carry out solo missions for the Jedi Council, he opted to stay paired with his former master, now equal. Dooku scoffed at the idea of them remaining together, claiming that Kostana was no longer responsible for his well-being. But Sifo's visions were becoming more frequent and intense. And since very few people knew about the burden he carried, he felt as though Kostana was the only person he could rely on. During a trip back to Coruscant, the Dyad were approached by a disgraced Jedi Master, Eula Braylon, who had been tasked with transporting Dooku back to his home planet of Sereno, which had been under a full-scale invasion by the Abyssian pirates. Dooku was a count and had held an important political and symbolic position on the planet, being the son of the Sereno's leader. Braylon wanted Sifo and Kostana to escort the Count safely home, but this was not in the cards. On their journey, the ship they were traveling on was discovered and shot down. During the ensuing fight, Sifo was separated from his companions and thrown into yet another vision. What he saw was a large crowd of people chanting Dooku's name, celebrating him as a hero. This disturbed Dyas, as he knew that his friend was vulnerable to the wiles of the dark side, especially when the temptation came in the form of fame and adoration. Later, it was discovered that Dooku's brother and leader of Sereno, Count Rammel, had in fact been behind the Abyssin attack in an attempt to manipulate the Republic into sending more military and financial aid to the planet. Dooku broached Rammel, but the confrontation turned violent. Dooku slayed his brother in battle and inherited his position as Count of Sereno. A celebration on the planet took place, with throngs of people chanting Dooku's name, just as Dyas had seen in his vision. After these events, Sifo became increasingly concerned over Dooku slipping back into the dark side of the Force. The Master.
Dyas continued his ascent into the Jedi ranks, becoming a master and even being admitted to the Jedi Council for a brief period of time. By this time, his precognitive ability had been honed and he was able to predict the future with a high degree of accuracy. One day, he had a vision of the Republic being thrown into a full-scale war, and though he did not believe he could stop it, he did think that he could help the Republic prepare for it. Sifo brought the visions he had before the Council and urged them to work with the Republic to raise an army for the coming threat. The Council rejected his proposal and thought him to be too extreme, if not conspiratorial, in his prognostications. This did not stop him from continuing to push for militarization, but it was all for naught, as his zealotry alienated him from the Council and he was eventually removed from his position. Dyas remained steadfast in his conviction, however, and would plan his next steps accordingly. Behind the Council's back, he approached the Kaminoans, who were well-versed in clone technologies, and brokered a deal with them to raise a clone army, a project which would last for more than a decade. In order to convince the Kaminoans to fulfill his request, he had to convince them that he was representing the interests of the Jedi Council. He was able to bankroll the effort from a clandestine investor whom he had met years prior, Hugo Damask of Damask Holdings, who was in fact the Sith Lord Darth Plagueis. Sifo was unaware of Damask's true identity or motives, and was completely fooled by the Dark Lord. Plagueis was a master of deception, and was able to conceal his dark powers to even the most adept of Jedis. His apprentice Sidious learned this skill as well, and even hoodwinked the entire Jedi Council. Dyas would set in motion a series of events that gave rise to the Clone Wars and the ascendancy of the Galactic Empire, and for all his prophetic skills, he was unable to foresee this fate.
Death and Legacy. Soon after Sifo had commissioned the Kaminoans to begin work on the clone army, he was recruited by then Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum. The Chancellor needed someone of Dyas's particular skill set to help the Republic broker a deal with a spice smuggling criminal organization called the Pike Syndicate. Knowing that negotiating with criminals would not be approved of by the Jedi Council, Valorum asked Sifo to carry out his mission in secret for the Republic. By this time, the beleaguered Jedi had already lost whatever small amounts of loyalty to the Council he had left, and agreed to help the Chancellor and fly to the planet Oba Daya to carry out negotiations. When he arrived, however, the talks had been postponed, and Dyas was contacted by the Council, who were requesting his presence for Civil War peace talks on Felucia. Not wanting to raise his suspicions about his current activity, he agreed. Unbeknownst to Sifo, just after he left for his mission to the Republic, Count Dooku had resigned from the Order and turned to the dark side, adopting the moniker Darth Tyrannus and becoming the pupil of Darth Sidious. Dooku had caught wind of his former friend's secret plot to raise a clone army, and wanting to prove his loyalty to Sidious, made a backdoor deal with the Pike Syndicate to kill Sifo as he left the planet. When Dyas arrived on Felucia, he had been followed by the Pikes and was shot down. His ship crashed on the planet's surface. Dooku inspected the wreckage himself to ensure that Dyas had in fact been killed. According to the official record, he recovered his body and turned it over to the local natives to be disposed of. But in fact, Dooku had preserved his body in cryogenic freezing for later use. With Sifo out of the way, the Count was able to contact the Kaminoans, and like Dyas before him, claimed to be representing the Jedi Council, and would assume overseeing the continuation of the growing of the clone army, except now for his own designs to sabotage the Republic, rather than save it. With his contacts at the Republic and Jedi Council, Dooku was able to erase all records of the planet Kamino from the Jedi archives, and also made circumstances surrounding Sifo Dyas' death top secret Republic information, obscuring anyone from looking further. Years after the Jedi Master had died, Darth Tyrannus partnered with the intergalactic banking clan to turn the Kalish warlord, formerly known as Kaimain Jai Shalil, into the cybernetic military genius, General Grievous. To add insult to injury, the final component that was used to complete Grievous was the blood of Sifo Dyas, and arming the general with one of Sifo's lightsabers. One of the few Jedis who survived Order 66 was the Iktachi male Farron Barr. He dedicated his life to avenge the Jedi and uncover all those responsible for handing the Republic to the Sith. Through his investigation, he was able to piece together the series of events that took place in the years leading up to the rise of Palpatine and his clone army. He was disturbed to find that it was an obscure former member of the Jedi Council with a gift for precognition who attempted to execute a grandiose plan to save the Republic, but in the end was only responsible for its demise. Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Lords podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon, so if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show. Welcome back to the Star Lords podcast. We are aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Jordan.
And this is Christian. We're just on our way to drop off some overdue library books at the Jedi Archives.
Indeed.
See if anyone's there to take our late fees.
So today we're discussing the conspicuous Sifo Dyas. What do you know about Sifo, Christian?
Just what we just talked about.
What do you know
learned.
prior to about?
Not a lot. I guess the general fan base would have just been introduced to the one throwaway line in Clone Wars that it was the clone army was commissioned by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas.
Yeah.
And
You mean Attack of the Clones?
Attack of the Clones, yeah. Sorry. And that's
because he also, I guess, appears in Clone Wars as well.
There are some more mentions later on, but if you had only watched the movies, that would be your only reference point for him, and we know nothing else about him.
Yeah.
So
That's right. Yeah, there's also a lot of written material as well that explores more of Sifo
with
Dyas.
every Star Wars character. But it's just interesting.
I think that's where a lot of the information that I drew from was from. It was lifted from a lot of the written material. Like you said, there's not a ton even in Clone Wars. I don't think he's
it's again more referential.
Yeah.
And he does make one thing that we didn't mention in the episode. He does, and arguably it's not even him, but there's an emaciated version of him in a Sith vision when Yoda's going through some trials, but it's not even really.
It's sort of
him.
like a necromancy thing, though. It's like he's back from the dead, but it's actually just an illusion,
an
It's not
apparition.
really-
So arguably not even Sifo Dyas. At all. Something wearing his face.
A depiction of Sifo.
Yeah.
So some interesting deep cuts with Sifo Dyas. The original name, from what I understand, was Sifo Dyas, and that was supposed to be a play on words for Sidious. And it was actually going to be Darth Sidious, who was raising the clone army and went by an alias.
Sifo Dyas.
Sifo Dyas. Yeah. And
very inconspicuous.
yeah. But I guess there's some misspelling or something, and George Lucas liked the name Sifo Dyas when someone said it. So he kind of stuck with it, but obviously turned it into its own character.
Yeah.
But from what I've read, and maybe someone will have to confirm, but it seems like Sifo was actually supposed to appear in the prequels at some point, and there's going to be more talking about him and more character building, but a lot of it was was in the original script, but a lot of that was just cut out for time's sake, and he was a less important character.
I was gonna
things.
I was just gonna mention for someone who essentially kicked off the Clone Wars, even within the context of the movie, they just name drop them and then just never bring it up again, which it could be a whole mystery plot in and of itself. It was well, who commissioned it and why, and should we look into this?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because Dyas is another one of those sort of throwaway lines in one of the films that gets turned into this whole story arc. But actually, I'm kind of a fan. I'm a fan of his story that the sort of expanded universe story that they wrote around him. I thought it was interesting and pretty consistent. I think there's maybe one plot hole where the one plot hole I thought maybe was where Dooku ends up taking over the overseeing of the clone army.
Yeah.
And that's not really mentioned when Obi-Wan goes to see the Kaminoans. They didn't mention anyone else.
You would think they'd talk about the most recent contact. rather than
the only person they talk about was Sifo. But I mean, you could maybe explain it away because Sifo initiated it and started it.
Yeah, and it could be Dooku was operating through an alias. I'm just operating out of the office of Sifo Dyas.
He actually was.
Okay.
He was pretending to be part of the council, and he was using some alias or something.
Okay, yeah, because that at least covers your tracks somewhat.
Yeah.
Our enemies are commissioning an army. This raises no flags.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's sort of a very tragic story too, right? But it's very interesting. There's conspiracies. There's I don't know. It's just I found it kind of a compelling story.
Yeah, I think as a through the eyes as a tragedy, it makes a lot of sense. Of like, yeah, it's I do quite enjoy it. I get a lot of vibes. Like Anakin's story is obviously a tragedy, and a lot of it is inspired by premonitions, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of cool. I love the story of Macbeth as well, and there's premonitions in there, and like
Right.
how these, and same with a lot of Greek tragedies again, right? Like premonitions and tragedy just go hand in hand, and like that's Diaz's whole thing is like trying to prevent a greater evil. He does something to try and prevent that evil, and is actually doing that thing to prevent the evil. Is the thing that causes the evil to happen. Pretty classic.
It's sort of interesting because, like, I wonder, even with those like Greek tragedies, were the Greeks, when they're writing about these myths, like were they trying to explain that they're basically being deterministic, basically like you can't really change the
fate.
future. It what will happen is what will happen. Like they had the very like linear view of time, and there isn't really any way that you can change it, even if what you know is going to happen. Because even the knowledge of knowing what's going to happen will make you put forth a series of events that will make that thing happen. Yeah. So it sort of like just becomes inevitable, right? And I sort of I wonder if that's like the problem with like prophecies, right? Like, and that's like the conundrum that Sifo Dyas sort of fell into. He saw all these things and he was right about them, but he didn't know that
he was the cause of it.
Yeah, he was like sort of the spark of it all, right? And without him, Palpatine never would have had his clone army, right? And none of what he did would have been possible. So it is kind of crazy to think how important of a role he actually played in like the plot of the whole series, really.
Yeah.
Like
up to the rise of the Empire wouldn't have happened without him. So
So I don't know. It's pretty interesting. One thing, and maybe like if other people have read more material or have more recent memory of the Clone Wars, it's very hard to distinguish what is Legends and what is like Disney Wars, you know. It's there isn't a clear delineation, and this is a problem with like a lot of Clone Wars material, is that it sort of has its feet in both
worlds.
In both worlds, right? Because a lot of it is considered to be Legends and canon. So.
And that's going to be an ongoing issue the farther we delve into the Clone Wars. We're definitely going to have to make stops here and there and be like, you know, do you accept this or this? Because it does kind of exist in between, because the show itself exists both in Disney and in canon to a certain extent. Like the last 2 seasons of the Clone Wars was a Disney invention post-purchase, right? So like, do you consider those canon? Do you just cut off the series at season 5?
Yeah.
Do you pick and choose what pieces fit and what kind of doesn't?
Yeah.
It lives in its own little bubble, which is as we move forward, it's going to be something that comes up more and more. I fear.
So I have a question, just theorizing, like what do you think would be if Disney went multiverse theory with Star Wars?
Don't give them ideas. I mean, that does already kind of exist.
Yeah,
go on.
But if they did, and because they wanted to like do fan service and preserve the
Legends material,
would that cutoff be like the Clone Wars? Basically, anything that happened after the Clone Wars is
kind of like a split in the timeline.
The split. They would bring in the event that changes everything, but even that probably isn't true, because now you have the High Republic era.
Yeah, now
which
you're
is
going
changed.
backwards too now. So
which is kind of changed, because that's not in High Republic is not Legends, right? It's all Disney canon. So I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know what to think anymore. I'm beaten down and so jaded now. I just don't even want them to touch Star Wars anymore. Just stop. Just leave it alone.
Yeah.
I kind of like now, honestly, the putting like a solid ending to Legends. I kind of like that now, because now everything kind of sits together.
True.
It's a story now. Like you can go back to it. Nothing's going to change now in the past. Right. Whatever they do with canon, they're gonna do, right. But Legends now lives in a box where it's unchanged. Well, for good and bad, right? Yeah, absolutely. Are there potential for amazing stories that we will never get to know?
Yeah.
Now, yes, but now we have something we can always look back to and is now preserved, and like it is the way it is for all its flaws and for all its achievements. So, yeah, I'm not. It's mixed feelings, right? Like,
Yeah.
I do like stories that end. I'm not a big fan of running TV seasons off until the audience no longer
Right, yeah,
cares and
yeah.
like the story and the quality just drops to nothing, right? Like,
Yeah.
just let it die,
It's
let
better,
it end.
It's better to have a planned ending.
Yeah,
than-
go out on top.
Yeah. Just try to milk
Not
it.
that
yeah.
necessarily that's what happened with Star Wars.
Yeah.
But now retroactively we can kind of be like, yeah, you know, it sits now in this glass case and we can go back like
That's
what we're
true,
doing now
right,
and
right.
examine it, right? Without like, oh, okay, now next week we have to update everything because it all changed now with this new
Yeah.
book or new movie.
Yeah.
So, not to say that that also doesn't have its own advantages as well. It's not one way or the other, but it's just a way
Yeah.
now.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of what I wonder if they ever did, like,
A multiverse.
yeah, a multiverse theory. Would people start writing in the legends again? Like,
Yeah.
would they start writing stories within?
And
that?
do you want them to? Again,
Yeah.
that's the thing, right? Like,
yeah,
from what I've seen coming out of Disney,
yeah,
not to play my hand too early here, but
Yeah.
like I kind of don't want to touch it anymore.
I don't want them to, and it'd be tough, I guess. I guess there is like a lot of time in between like Knights of the Old Republic and the Rise of the Empire, right? Like,
There's eras you can definitely explore.
yeah, there's eras.
And even now you could, even I kind of do this to some extent. I really like The Mandalorian.
Yeah,
And like I kind of like mentally retrofit it into Legends, and like I can make it work somehow. You know.
yeah.
So
It could-
and every person
actually,
I imagine does that, right?
It
So,
could. The way it was written, it
could theoretically, yeah.
I'd have to go back and look at what was happening. What was it, 5 or 6 years after the destruction of the Death Star?
Yeah, I can't
that
remember
when,
exactly, but it's
Mandalorian
yeah,
takes
it's
place, yeah.
shortly.
Yeah,
after.
within But like, yeah, Luke Skywalker is there. He's trying to recreate the Jedi Order and
Yeah.
yada yada. Right?
Some of the details you might get a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
and Boba Fett definitely doesn't fit.
That's true.
but
yeah, 100%.
There are ways you could
Yeah.
patch things over. And again, like I said, I think most people to some extent,
Yeah.
their minds are plastic enough that they can
That's true.
fit both to
in
some
this
extent.
postmodern age.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
We get-
Whatever Star Wars
Yeah.
truth is your truth. You can believe.
Precisely.
Hey, if you want Godzilla to be Star Wars,
Yeah.
why not? Why not?
One cool little deep cut in Sifo's story was like early on, he and Dooku found these Sith artifacts called the Bogan collection, and
Yeah.
Bogan was the dark side moon of Tythus.
Tython.
Yeah. So that was kind of a cool little callback to the
Yeah, deep,
yeah.
like, ancient history.
Yeah, exactly. Which I thought was kind of cool. Yeah. What else did you want to say on that?
Just kind of going back to the prophetic and like self-fulfilling prophecies. Yeah, like with Anakin, you know, the whole thing that launches him into his fate
Right.
is his visions of one, his mother, and then once that becomes true, he realizes his visions are real. That pushes him into like, okay, now I'm having visions of my wife dying in childbirth, and then the same thing happens where his actions cause the outcome that he had envisioned.
Yeah.
So like again, this question, I think we did bring it up in the past before. This question of fate in Star Wars.
Yeah.
You know, like, are these things destined to happen no matter what? I actually had a very interesting conversation with a friend recently about literally that. Like, if Anakin's
Okay.
visions, you know, could Anakin have changed the future? Did
Right.
Anakin have to become Darth Vader to fulfill his? Because even his existence, the prophecy of the Chosen One, is also essentially nailing him into a corner of like, well,
Right.
so was the only way for him to go dark to become light, right? Like, was
Yeah.
that the only way that he could have taken on Palpatine? What would happen if he didn't?
It's very
Right.
deterministic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that tracks, and it might. I'm not a huge Buddhist philosopher, but I don't know if it tracks with the general worldview of Buddhism. Not to maybe nail Star Wars into that
Yeah.
necessarily. Obviously, we've done the whole episode on religion and Star Wars, but I'm curious as to like, more and more it seems like Star Wars is a fatalistic universe.
Yeah.
Where things seem predetermined. There's not a lot of cases of people like changing their fate or like denying the future.
Yeah, and there is sort of they sort of weave into the fabric of the universe, like just the force is a force, like where it pushes events in a certain direction
or pulls
and waits everything to happen in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
So almost like you can't stop it.
Yeah, all is a force wills, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so it either reinforces that idea because, like, again, I'm, and then we had the whole storyline too about prophecies we just covered in the stories of the Jedi Covenant, right?
Right.
And that's in the Old Republic. So this just keeps happening, right? So like these visions cause these actions, and is it lazy writing or is it the fate?
Yeah,
is a real thing in the universe, and it's just the way things go, and there's no breaking from the cycle, right? So, which is also interesting too, because there are also encouraging stories that are kind of outside of Star Wars, of like standing up to fate, and yeah, it was just an archetypical kind of story that is in the opposite vein, right?
Yeah.
Beyond that, another thing I kind of wanted to mention with the story of Sifo Dyas, the Jedi Council gets maybe justifiably a lot of bad rap. Oh, they should have seen this coming. They became, decadent and corrupt. Maybe not decadent, but definitely corrupt by compromise and stuff with the Republic and things like that. You often hear these things leveraged against the Jedi Council around the time of the Clone Wars, which led to their eventual fall. But to be fair, when you have situations where you have like rogue Jedi like Dooku and Sifo Dyas doing stuff behind their backs, like, hey, maybe things wouldn't have been bad if they just listened to the council also. Yeah. So
literally like making paramilitaries.
Yeah, right? Like you literally did the Sith's will. Yeah. So again, sure, I'm all for...
This was one time where the council's wisdom was actually correct.
Yeah.
Like that maybe Sifo was being too extreme, and he couldn't see the larger context of his actions.
Yeah,
and like
he was so driven by his visions.
So convicted in his own visions, right? Like he couldn't see beyond that. And yeah, like it seemed like the council was actually right and he was wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So for all the crap the council gets, maybe it's not just their fault. Yeah. And then there's always the idea of like a negative force too, right? Like, yeah, you can be blamed for all your failures and your incompetencies, but when you have someone actively acting against you all the time, like the Sith, to be fair, right? Like at some point they're going to get through. They're going to catch you in a moment of weakness. They're going to exploit your failures too. So I'm just trying to give the Jedi Council some points here. I feel like we're always criticizing them, and everyone's always criticizing them. But
no, I agree. I think they made the right call on this one.
Yeah,
and I mean, maybe they could have handled it differently. Like they could have tried to try and get Sifo to explore his visions more, to get a wider context or something.
And same with Anakin too, right? They could have treated Anakin differently so as to avoid maybe the crash course that they were on. But again, you have negative forces. You have people like Palpatine actively trying to leverage that against you as well. So it's not strictly your own incompetence. It's a compiling of factors that led to an ultimate outcome, right? So, like if you're in a horrific car accident, like maybe you were texting and driving, and maybe you drank a little bit, or maybe, you just start compounding these factors. Maybe if you hadn't done this one thing, maybe if you hadn't made that one turn earlier or later, or, how all these things just kind of compile. And it's not, you can't just point to one group and be like, it's all their fault that this happened. Maybe everyone had a part to play.
Yeah.
And then in a fatalistic universe, they had to play their part.
Yeah. And there's also, I mean, even if the council went along with Dyas and like raised an army like he requested, there's no saying that Sidious still wouldn't have taken
exploited it
somehow. And
or worse, what if the Jedi Council itself got corrupted and they have all this military power and they become the Empire,
right? Yeah,
and then force their religion on everyone, side, right? There's so many things you could, And sorry, one last thing about Dyas. Again, speaking to the tragedy component of his life, I think that's also a warning about compromise as well. Dyas kept compromising his like Jedi values, I guess.
Yeah.
And his master, what if they'd reported Dooku when they saw him playing with the dark side? What if?
Well, she tried to hide his prophetic ability as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So again, you have all these like little compromises that ended up leading to like a really bad thing.
Yeah.
So again, kind of putting some guilt maybe on some more people, not just the council, but like, yeah, if that owned up to their errors or owned up, not, you know, gotten to the point where they're like literally secretly ordering an entire army, you know.
I think too, there's also the component of, and I didn't really, this is just me conjecturing, but because I didn't really read anything about it, but there was an incident when Sifo saw the event of those floating cities crashing on that planet that we talked about in the episode. And he wasn't able to stop it. Like, it did end up happening, and like that's a lot of guilt to live with, right? And that could be you could do all sorts of motivated reasoning out of that. Like you're now you think whatever major vision that you have to act on it.
You didn't last time, and look what happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Anakin is the exact same thing.
Exactly.
His mother, he kept having visions, and he kept ignoring it, and then she died. And then he's like, okay, well, now that I'm having visions of Padme's death. I have to do anything to make that not happen, because I didn't act fast enough the last time. Same exact motivating force, right? So I like Sifo Dyas because he is kind of a unique character, you know, like and he doesn't come from any sort of nobility or prestigious background.
Yeah, prestigious background. And he sort of like didn't have any progenitors after him, right? Like he didn't even really have any students that he trained. He was sort of just a standalone character, but he played a very important role. And he was actually like, he seems to have been like very, very gifted. He even was on the Jedi Council, right? Like he was obviously had talent and wisdom and whatnot. So, but you know, he unfortunately just got thrown for a loop with his visions, you know, and couldn't let it go. So, but anyways, just before we sign off here, I wanted to thank our new Patreons. We have a few of them, a few new patrons. Big shout out to Steve, Voldstag, and Parachute Cannon, new patrons of ours. Thanks to everyone who supports the show. You help pay the bills, help us keep going so we can
help pay our library fines.
Exactly, make more content. And on that note, I hear the librarian shushing us here at the Jedi Archive, and we are out.